Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Coroner. A very interesting episode. A lot of interesting things went down, so let's, kind of break it down. Well, first and foremost, obviously the new case. First and foremost, we got, Jenny and Ross moving into a new place. At first, I was like, is this that same place that lady died in last episode? And it totally ended up being, I was like, that's a little weird. It's also interesting because this episode had Jenny not telling Ross a lot about not a lady dying in this place, because like Liam and Ross end up meeting and he's like, because he pieces it together, your mom's a coroner. Well, your mom's Jenny? And it's like, yeah. Oh, yeah, because we actually met because she came here, the lady died here. He's like, wait, she died here? What room? It's just kind of like his mom didn't tell him that, because I guess it's like, I guess because of what she deals with at work, it's kind of like, I guess it's the type of thing of like, the effed up thing is you probably break that down. It's like, it's a good chance you move into a place someone might have died there before, in many different regards, just thought that was an interesting thing. But you kind of focus on the case. Basically, the victim's name is Vic. They end up finding him because basically he was banging on a door for help. There's like a blood trail, from his hands and his feet, and he's in the bathroom. He's got glass all on his body, and he's got like this massive like cut in his neck and everything, and it's like it's like a pretty deep like wound near his neck and everything, and it's like that's actually what killed him. And obviously McAvoy's kind of like, oh, did he get thrown from a car? And then it's like, yeah, and then someone brought him here, and he's like, yeah, the more I say it out loud, the more stupid it sounds. But also, once again, it's that thing of Jenny seeing that dog. I'm like, what does that represent? Because like I say, I don't know whether it's like her trauma that manifests like that, or maybe that's something in her past that, it manifests itself like that. Like, thinking about what happened to David, it triggers a latent kind of like subconscious thing that manifests itself as that dog. I mean, I guess maybe that's supposed to be a manifestation of her PTSD and her anxiety, like all the stuff she's potentially taking that medication for. But regardless, now it's a situation of like, all right, well, we got to investigate David. Like, his wife Shanti's there, and she's covered in blood because she was there, after finding him and everything. And obviously, Jenny's trying to be a little more respectful, being like, you want her to just sit here and wait, for a female cop to show up. It's like, no, like, the fact of the matter is she's not a suspect or anything. It's like, I'm going to be here, like, I'll get her clothes and everything because her clothes are evidence. And obviously, Shanti's talking about the fact it's what she's going through. It's like she's got to be there for her son. It's just like, how does she, explain this? Like, what is, it's like, I hope you never have to go through this. She says that to Jenny. You're like, oh, sadly, not knowing that Jenny literally went through this like 3 months ago, because Jenny's telling her like, you're going to be okay. You're stronger than you think you are. That basically you'll find a way to kind of persevere through like this very tragic situation. But obviously they go and visit the sex party. The dude next door is like, oh, I'm a lawyer, blah, blah, blah. And like, he's like, oh, the noise complaints and stuff like that. It's actually sad because it's like, if you had, the music was so loud, like he wasn't able to get any help at the time or whatever. But it's like, because he actually went, because I think, because he was trying to get help at the time. But I guess with everything, like, they ended up kind of closing the door. Home dude probably didn't want to have anything to do. We'll get to it soon enough. But it turns out that neighbor with the loud music and everything, it's the moment he was like, oh, no, you can't come in here. It's like, I was like, what is it? I was like, is this about to be an orgy? And it's like, oh, it's an orgy. It's like, no, they don't say orgy. They just say a sex party, which is interesting. And I noticed one of those people in the background. I was like, isn't that? I was like, hell yeah, that's the actor who played Fancy in Killjoys. I was like, that's so crazy. Because when you break it down, the sci-fi connections are actually kind of nuts in this episode, because it's like, he's in this. Obviously, Killjoys was also on Sci-Fi. Like I brought up last episode, Roger Cross played Six in Dark Matter. What's also interesting, who I believe to be Jenny's dad, Gordon, he was the sheriff. He's Nathan's dad from Haven. So I'm like, the sci-fi connections is nuts. But I think it's also stems from the fact is, I think it's just one of those things like, well, this is a Canadian show. They're probably all Canadian actors. So it's probably that thing of like, oh yeah, like it's probably just like an American show where you're like, oh, you see enough American actors and stuff from time to time because you're like, oh, it's kind of the thing or whatever, So it's probably that. But it just kind of blows my mind a little, because it's like, I won't go into the tangents, but I just thought that was kind of interesting in the long run. how that was, I was just like, oh shit, fancy, that's crazy. But basically they're people with powerful positions or whatever, because they own like, oh, we own a very successful chain of like gluten-free places or whatever. But then there's a lady that was giving McAvoy the eyes. I was like, what's up with this? Because even Jenny was picking up on it. I was like, what the hell? I was like, at first I was like, do you know each other or something? But it was like, no, I guess not. But it turns out later on, oh, you super know each other. That's a thing we'll kind of get to soon. Well, I'll go ahead and talk about it. Because the fact of the matter is, I'm assuming that's like an ex. Because for her, it's like, oh, like... Because apparently she used to try and invite him to those type of parties, but I guess it's like for her it's like, oh, I just want sex, because he's like, oh, I've been thinking about you, so it's probably like, you know, an ex situation. But for her it's like, oh, let's just have fun, let's not like think too much about it, like let's not get in our feels about this. Probably not gonna be, I mean, depends, it might not be the most sustainable situation. We'll see whether things kind of work out in that regard or not. But the case gets more and more interesting because there's a lady, well, because obviously they end up finding out like the wound he has is actually a large piece of glass that was stuck inside. And so it's like, obviously it wasn't just an accident or whatever, like someone intentionally murdered him. And then like, obviously they end up finding the glass like thrown away. And I thought this was so interesting because it was like, you know, Jenny was going about things saying like, oh, you need to be a little more sensitive because like, Shanti wanted to go back inside to get like a blanket, but it's like, you know, he's like, I'm letting her get like a blanket out of a crime scene, like, because I think for her it's just kind of like, I think for him he's like, I like how dogged you can be about the investigation and stuff like that, but for him I think it's just like, I mean, because obviously Jenny was coming from the perspective of there was a little bit kindred spirit, because like both of them are kind of going through a very similar traumatic thing and trying to, you know, hold themselves together while being there for their respective children, you know. So I think, you know, maybe that you could make the argument, maybe that kind of put blinders up for Jenny in this regard, or at the very least, she was bringing her own perspective into this thing. But obviously, there's a whole thing with Lauren because she has cut marks on her hand. But like McAvoy kind of sees like, oh, the fact is, were you drinking? She was like, oh, that. But he was like, no, I'm not trying to say that. He's like, you being like, no matter how many drinks you have, that doesn't give anyone the right to kind of assault you. And it's like, Vic was on top of her and she was fighting him off, and that's how the glass table thing. But she's like, oh, a bunny saved her, and it's like, oh, like McAvoy thinks she's being crazy, but Jenny immediately believes her because it's like the wounds on her hand, if she was the one that stabbed him, the wounds would be like a lot worse on her hands. And also it's just, you know, because it's like, it's also the thing of like, the reason why she believed her is because Jenny's case, seeing an animal isn't always helpful, you know, so that's why she kind of believed her, because it's like, you know, why would you make up something, if you're going to lie, why create something so out there like that? So it's a situation of like, it's like your animals show up to kind of protect you. And he was like, oh, do you see animals or something? And she was like, no, because that would mean I was crazy, you know. And obviously, you know, he was saying like, you know, I forgot what he was kind of getting at, because it's like his whole thing is, you know, because for him it's the whole thing of like, people, as a detective, people lie even to themselves. That's kind of what he learned, you know, as a detective. And, you know, it was comparison, like obviously her background as an ER doctor and all that. But regardless, like the bunny suit and everything, Allison could smell like a certain cologne on it, and it's like, oh, we know exactly who that is. And it turned out to be home dude Gus, who'd opened the door in the first place. It's like, we think you were responsible, but it's like, no, for him it's like, and it's actually super messed up. Vic was like, oh, you're not attractive enough, you can only watch and you have to be in a bunny suit. I was like, that's super messed up. It's like, oh, you're at the sex party but you can't participate. That's an extra middle finger of being like, oh, everyone's super banging it out and you're just like forced to watch. That's like a little like, that's in my opinion, that's like the worst case of blue balls ever. It's like, that's super messed up that you can't even participate. I don't know, I just thought that was messed up. But he came in after everything happened. He got Lauren to a taxi and stuff like that. He was like, wait, is Lauren trying to say I did? He's like, I didn't do it, but I saved the dude. I did the right thing. Like, he was on top of her. He was about to rape her, you know? So, but it wasn't until Jenny was in her therapy session that things kind of pieced together for her about this case, because for her it's like she started talking about, you know, David and stuff like that, about obviously the fact is that she didn't tell Ross everything. We'll get to that soon enough. But also it's like, you know, she talked about like the new case she's working on, the sex party, but then also she's like, oh, I met someone and it was like a stranger, and we, and it's like, oh, it was good, because she talks about the fact that her and David were actually sleeping in separate beds, but she made it seem like, she'd sneak back in her room before, Ross got out, just to make it seem like everything was copacetic when it really wasn't. She wanted to make it seem like, oh, things are still okay, that this is still kind of a happy, healthy relationship. But then it made her think like, wait, the bed wasn't used. She thought about Jenny's room. It's like the other side of the bed wasn't used, so she went back there to kind of confirm it, and she's talking to Shanti a little bit about, everything about, because obviously she's like, I want to get away, and obviously Jenny kind of opens up with the fact that it's like, oh yeah, my husband died, and it's like, oh, you're a widow and a mother. It's like, yeah, so she's in a very similar suit. Like I said, it's a bit of a kindred spirit thing. But Jenny kind of ended up piecing it together, especially when Luke was like, oh yeah, we saw the bunny and everything. So it's like, you saw all that. And it's like, okay, so the wife is lying. And on the drive there, it turns out that's actually how Shanti and Vic met. They met through the sex parties. But then, like, they made an arrangement to stop the moment they had Luke. For her, that was enough. It's like, oh yeah, but for Vic, it wasn't. Like, he kept doing it because, like, oh, he wanted to use this as, what's the word I'm looking at? Networking of, like, oh, these people, associations, and, like, get my brand strong and stuff like that. But to be fair, it stopped being about that and just kind of having fun and being powerful. And it's also like, she started noticing more and more, like, he'd have scratches on his neck, on his arms or whatever. And she had to be the one to lie to her son, try to explain them away. But for him, it wasn't, he couldn't be satisfied with what they had. She was just happy to be a mom and everything. And it just seems like who knows the full story, because we weren't there in their entire relationship. But it is a situation of like, because it's like probably a thing too of like, she wasn't enough for him anymore. So that's why he was doing the sex party thing. And so what set her off? Well, because for one, Jenny was also saying, like, I get it. Because she's like, your husband, he died of an aneurysm. It's, you're lucky. But she's like, I'm not that lucky because I was an ER doctor who couldn't save her husband from dying. But she's also like, I get where you're coming from. She's like, my husband lied to me too. But for her, it's like, it's not the lies. It's the fact is that it wasn't him that had to lie. It was her. She kept having to make excuses for what he was doing, for his actions, his choices. And so that kind of made things, harder on her. But what really set her off is like when she saw the bunny carrying, Lauren away, it clicked in this, because obviously Lauren worked for her husband, and it's like, oh, the party and everything. It's because in that moment she realized, like, oh, what he did, especially as like, oh, she dropped Luke off and then like kind of came back and looked and saw the state he was in, is just all that he had did. It's like, for her, it's like what you did, trying to save your husband. I did what I did to protect my son, because, the monster, like her husband was kind of becoming, or kind of was who he was. It's like, because it's eventually it would have been more and more, because it would have been a whole thing of like, well, what happened to Daddy? Oh, Daddy ended up like this because a woman was defending herself against him assaulting, and it's like, to protect her son from like the evil. And obviously Jenny understands that, because it's like, and once again, the whole lying to your son thing, she lied to her son because I was wondering, I was like, because I was like, oh, Ross is taking this about better than I thought. And it's not till Gordon brings up, and Ross is like, wait, what? Yeah, I guess Gordon assumed that Ross knew. I guess Jenny must have told him. But she probably never expected her dad to go running his mouth off and telling Ross like that. And so Ross kind of got that all thrown at him at once. But also, it's just like Jenny didn't tell him about it, because it's like, your dad was important to you. I didn't want to break that image of him for you, especially with him being gone. Like, that would have just salted his name. So she probably just was like, oh, we need a fresh start. Like, in his mind, it's probably a thing of like, Mom doesn't want to be here because it's a reminder of Dad. Like, I get it. So he just kind of went with the flow and the motion. So he probably didn't really think too much of it. Like, why the sudden change like that. He already saw his mom was already making changes. She got a new career, cut her hair. Because even he was talking to his friend, because obviously he was at the swimming class, and he was swimming, and apparently like something that his dad had corrected him on with his swimming before. Like, he's like, I messed it up again. And his friend is like, oh, your mom must be going through something traumatic, because she cut her hair. Women only cut their hair when they're going through something traumatic. And obviously it's like, but he was like, I'm more worried about you. And Ross was like, no, I'm okay. And the moment he was saying that, I'm like, typically when people say they're okay, it makes you think they're not okay. And, I say that from personal experience. I tell people all the time, like, I'm okay when I'm not. And that in itself, it's not okay. But everyone tries to be, because I think for Ross, it's like he wants to try and be strong. I think not just for his mom, but for himself. It's like, no, I'm not going to let it kind of, because also he ends up talking about it later on. But the reason why he went back is because he felt like he owed it to his dad. It's like, I need to be here one last time, get things right because my dad was there to kind of push me for this stuff, So it's just like the parallels between the case and obviously, Jenny's personal life. Obviously, I thought, it's a very, especially because it's still being such a fresh wound and the situation with Shanti being such a fresh situation. Because obviously she was like thinking back to the whole thing and she was kind of losing control. She was driving super fast, but luckily she stopped because it's like your son is in here with you. You need to stop. And, because even, McAvoy is like, you could have died or whatever. And he's about to go towards Shanti, but Jenny is like, just give her a second. Her parents are coming in to take care of Luke and everything, so it's just a messy, sad situation, And when it's all said and done, though, Jenny comes home to Ross, who's kind of broken down by the fact is, like, Grandpa told me the truth about, and, like, obviously Jenny's like, it's okay to be mad at him. He's like, and for Ross, is like, what's the point? He's dead. At least when he was alive, when you guys fought, he could fight back, and she's like, so you knew about that, because she thought she hid that. Kids are sadly smarter than, they notice things whether you really realize it or not. No matter how much you hide it, they're going to pick up on, things, whether they fully understand it or not. But for Jenny, it's like, your dad loved you very much. And Ross is just, because it's understandable. Once, I brought it up last episode, it leaves you conflicted. It's like, your dad did this terrible stuff. Like, he put you in a very unfavorable position and he died. Obviously, Jenny and him were having issues already, but they were staying together for Ross's sake, for their family's sake, and just for things to be the way they are, because Jenny already feels guilt. I'm sure there's probably some part of her brain that feels guiltier because she's like, we weren't in the best place when he died, so makes her feel even guiltier. Because I hope it isn't this, but it might be a thing of her being like, maybe I didn't try hard enough to save him because maybe I felt a little relief for him being gone, considering the tension between. I'm throwing that in there. Like, the show hasn't really showcased that. Because obviously, I feel like if she knew ahead of time, maybe that'd be a concern of hers, like the whole gambling thing. Like, if she knew that, maybe there would be some relief in that. I don't know. Maybe there's something to it, maybe there's not. Because, like, it might not have been, like, there might have been some love there, but maybe it wasn't as strong as it was. But that's why I mean, like, maybe she felt guilty because there was some slight relief that he, like I said, that's easily me reading too much into it. But, obviously, her holding, Ross, because Ross is like, I went to the pool today, to honor him, but I can't do it tomorrow or like the day after that. It's too much. But Jenny telling him we'll get through it. She actually goes to stop by Liam, because obviously for her it's like whatever their situation is, she can't really do it. It's nice, it feels good, but with just everything going on, she has to look after her son, be there for him, and there's no place for that right now because she's got so much of a messy, complicated situation in herself. So it's like I can't be stepping forward, with this whole thing. So it's like we could be friends with benefits, in the sense of like, oh, like you fix my house, even though I can't really pay you for that, but you can fix the bridge. She was like, oh yeah, I can do anything, so what that dynamic between them is going to be like. Even the fact is that Liam literally, he was like, oh, I live in a tree and stuff like that and live off like beer and burgers is how I get paid, plus like the monthly like paycheck the adequate monthly paycheck he gets from like the military and stuff like that. But it's like, I thought he was like, that was a joke or something, or like him like talking about his place or something. I didn't expect him to literally live in a tree, which I'm like, what's Liam's old deal? Because he talked about it a little bit about his military past. It's like, oh yeah, like, how it was over there for him. It was just like, for him, it's just like, I killed a whole bunch of people. Like, that sentence alone, I think, kind of speaks volumes about his experience and just kind of what he carries on. I mean, like, everyone kind of carries their trauma, and I think that's going to be a thing between him and Jenny, each of them carrying their trauma in their own ways. Obviously, there's still a lot to, Liam that we don't know, but obviously, even like McAvoy, like, not necessarily trauma, but the fact of the matter is, it's like, oh, this, lady he's running into, like, oh, it's apparently an ex of his, potentially, they have history, what that is, what their current situation is going to be, because it's, like I said earlier, it's supposed to just be sex. Will it stay that way? Will he want more? Will she not want more? That could easily be the situation. I'm interested to ultimately see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. So the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.